Welcome. I'm Sherry Sylvester, a distinguished senior fellow here at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, and this is Ninth in Congress. Today, I'm going to talk with Ryan Gravatt, a pioneering digital strategist who led Texas conservatives into the digital age. We'll talk about what we can expect to see next in the digital communications world of public policy and politics as we edge closer to a presidential campaign year and massive issue battles in Texas, from property taxes to parental empowerment. Ryan was a member of former Texas Governor Rick Perry's original campaign team, and his digital expertise and strategic vision has ensured that the delivery of Texas's conservative message has always been cutting edge. He launched his firm, Raconteur Media, in 2004, years before the iPhone was released, and he set the bar for website development, social media outreach, email, digital advertising, and search engine marketing from the beginning. Ryan is also an award-winning expert in developing digital strategies and analytics for audience development. I want to talk to him about what's changed in digital communications in the last 20 years, what conservatives are doing right, what we're getting wrong. Ryan, thank you for coming.
Sherry, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much.
20 years, take it. How is it different? I was there with you 20 years ago, so.
That's right. Well, 20 years ago, it was one communication a day. If we got one social media post, one email, we were doing great. Now it's multifaceted for sure. It's video, it's an appearance on a podcast, it's several emails, it's multiple social media posts, it's reacting to social media posts. It's 24/7 for sure. I mean, it's always been 24/7 because the access is always there.
So how do we get that? You're like me. You came out of print journalism.
That's right.
Where we were waiting till the newspaper came out, except if we were working in New York, and then they just kept coming out. But what was that start? When you began working for the Perry campaign, they called you. What were they looking for? Were we doing email? Were we at Facebook by that time? What started it off?
Using the medium to be proactive instead of reactive. Using the medium to reach to the grassroots as opposed to using it to be your main push mechanism. So I would say before then, candidates and campaigns were using their websites to make sure the press saw their message as a contrast to whatever the press was writing, and then to try to influence the press, and then to really reach out to high-level stakeholders. And then in 2007, where you really had the push and pull of search engines, and you had email being, a ubiquitous tool, the Perry campaign really wanted to get to the grassroots and was really hard driving about, let's just bypass all of the proxies like, TV, radio, print journalism, and let's just get our message directly to voters and to the grassroots conservatives of Texas. And it worked.
So was it a reaction to the bias? I mean, so that would make it unique to Texas conservatives. Mm-hmm. Was that the impetus? We knew that. I remember Rick Perry did not visit editorial boards.
Right.
He made that decision that he would not care.
Right. I think it was the dynamic of the race. The press was in sort of fight promotion, Rick versus Kay Bailey Hutchison returning to Texas from the U.S. Senate. And there were all these puff polls that said that she had this giant lead over Rick Perry. So that's kind of fast forwarding from 2007 to 2009. In the early stages of 2007, it was kind of like, how do we make this machine work? Rick Perry was on the edge of technology, had a BlackBerry. His son Griffin was advocating for more technology within the campaign beyond just like spreadsheets and databases for talking to people. And Dave Carney, his consultant, knew if you could vote count, you could get closer to predicting your victory. So fast forward to 2009, the end of the legislative session, when the press was really promoting Kay Bailey Hutchison. The interest within the campaign of bypassing the press was already there. And if they were going to go ahead and nominate her as the next Republican to run for governor, we were going to surpass that. We were going to do everything we could do to get to the grassroots. If they wanted to ride, the good wave of press, we were going to go directly to the grassroots. And we knew that wasn't through direct mail, newspapers, press, radio. We knew it was directly to communicate with the grassroots. And so, any campaign that can scale fast and frequently is the one that has the best chance of winning. And so we just put all our eggs into a paperless campaign and a paperless strategy for Rick Perry. And it worked immediately.
So what was the tool? I mean, was it really didn't have Twitter then? No. Was it Facebook? Was it email? Was it? I remember you were working on this thing where Perry would go out to talk to people and hold up his phone and tell them to text a number.
Well, that was a presidential campain.
Oh, right. We'll talk about those. What were these tools? Because I think they've changed.
Yeah, so they have changed. So 2009, 2010, Dave Carney came up with a home headquarters plan, where we would try to recruit people who could recruit other people in their network. Kind of like a neighborhood captain who could say, oh yeah, I'll find 20 people in my precinct or in my neighborhood and I'll sign them up and they'll be under me and then I'll communicate to them after you communicate to me. And then we started asking people to get other people to submit their email address and phone numbers within the platform so that we had, contacts for thousands and thousands of people. And the idea, we didn't call it vote counting, but we had folks take a pledge. I'm going to vote for Rick Perry. And they would be in the home headquarters and they would be sort of tiered. There'd be people in the county who had the most contacts and they would recruit other people and ask them to bring in more contacts. So you asked me about the tools. We built a custom website because that wasn't just off the shelf where a person could go in and enter their profile and then start entering the names and inviting other people to join them. And then email. And then we use search engines. If people heard about it or if people were interested in it, we made it highly visible in search engines. And then there were databases in the background, which, to that point, e-commerce was the sort of the mode for using a database. You would use a database for putting dynamic information up on a website so that people could shop it. But for us, it was a database of collecting information that people would input and then pushing it back to the campaign so that they could use it. So we were collecting names, email addresses, pledges, and phone numbers tied to a person who would support Rick Perry. And we would separate out the channels of communication, still using traditional phones and not texting. We would hand the phone numbers off to the phone folks, and we would keep the emails, and we would just try to hit these goals of growth that Dave Carney would set. We had a lot of dynamic content on our website so that we could tell if somebody had been there before and had signed up for the home headquarters. We weren't going to give them a home headquarters recruiting message. We would give them something else, like maybe donate, like maybe come to a meeting in their area. And if somebody had never join the home headquarters, we would show them a message like, become a Rick Perry supporter, pledge your vote for Rick Perry, join the home headquarters movement. And then we had door prizes. We had to phrase it a particular way because campaigns could not be in the business of handing out rewards for people's support and votes. So we had these door prizes, which were essentially put your name in the hat and we'll pick your name out of the hat and you might win a meeting with Coach Mike Leach at Texas Tech. You might win a meeting with Ben Crenshaw in a round of golf. And so we had 10 or 12 prizes like that. And then some of these volunteers or some of these supporters who offered up prizes would do it 2 and 3 times. So a guy like Mike Leach might do a meet and greet, and then he might do a quarterback camp, and then he might do something else. So we had these incentives to have people enter and recruit other supporters for Governor Perry.
But at the same time that this was happening, Governor Perry really defined a new conservative message for Texas.
Correct.
It was. That's why he beat Hutchinson, but she did not have that message. She was
of Washington.
She was of Washington.
And being of Washington at that time, you have to recall that was kind of the cresting of the Tea Party wave that was starting to come about. To say that Governor Rick Perry and his conservative values were doing something wrong in Texas just didn't ring true. No matter how many times or how many ways Deborah Medina was also an opponent.
Mm-hmm.
Kay Bailey Hutchison was also opponent. No matter how many times they tried to say that, he was pro-business, he was growth. It was low taxes, predictable regulation, and jobs.
So was it all this recruiting one-on-one, or was there a way that you were looking for people who were also pro-business, pro-jobs, pro-conservative values, or did that come later in identifying those people?
Yes and yes. So a lot of the recruiting that we did offline was through a traditional campaign apparatus. Grassroots directors going all over the state in their regions and trying to talk to political people who would talk to political people. But what we wanted to do with the home headquarters is get even further deep in that network before you could get the county chairman to tell you the 5 people you ought to talk to. We wanted to have signed up thousands of people in that area so that we weren't relying on the traditional political communication game of telephone tag. Plus, we were running in a primary. So anybody that, a well-known politico in, say, East Texas was telling us to talk to, probably also telling other candidates to talk to. So the ability to sort of drive deeply into those grassroots networks using digital tools was really an advantage for Governor Perry.
So he gets nominated. Where were the Democrats? What did they do in response to this?
They had Bill White of Houston, and they just simply said it was time for a change. It was TV campaigns. It was just your traditional campaign.
Not much digital.
Not much digital, no. And then we defined him with microsites that were taking images of him and spinning his messages from truth and fact, and again relying on the same sort of tactics of moving to grow the coalition or the vote count from, in addition to Republican primary voters, to independents and Democrats. We did some grassroots fundraising, which was successful. We would ask supporters didn't quite understand why we weren't doing the traditional media. So we said, okay, we'll offer signs, but you have to pay for them. And so in exchange for a donation on a Perry campaign shop, people could buy yard signs, people could buy T-shirts. And that was really new, and that was really different than what most campaigns were doing in that time. They wanted to hand out the yard signs, and they wanted people who had already pledged their support to say, give me my yard sign. And instead it was like, well, you can buy a yard sign from us. So back to what the Democrats did or didn't do. They were essentially...
We're digitally engaged, Ryan and I are.
What the Democrats did or didn't do was they simply just ran a traditional statewide campaign. Let's raise a bunch of money. Let's spend a bunch of money on TV. Let's use what we think are the messages that are going to work well to defeat Rick Perry. And it just ended up being working, into our strengths, and that we had already communicated with grassroots voters across Texas and already introduced them, and if they didn't already know who Governor Perry was, and by that time he was running for his 3rd term. So his name ID was very solid. His negatives were known. His positives were high. And there wasn't anything that, millions and millions of dollars worth of TV could do.
So talk about a little bit, pulling back, just about social media in general. I'm interested in the changes in Facebook over this amount of time. Mm-hmm. I know working on campaigns during that time, politicians and policy people as well really liked Facebook because they could do direct communications with people, and then that turned into a nightmare. So can you talk about how Facebook has evolved and sort of where it is today, if anywhere?
Yeah, sure. So I'll disclose at the top that in 2020 I wrote that I think by 2024 politics will be off the Facebook platform. And I think if Facebook, Meta had their druthers, that would be the case. I think there's just too much interest and fervor within the audience for them to just completely ban it entirely. And also they're doing a regulation dance that I think if they banned it entirely, both sides would say, we always knew you hated us, and now we're going to get you. So they've got this delicate dance. I still think they're going to find a way to segment it and move it off of the purview of everyday users of Facebook. So when we started with Perry, and then as we advanced through other campaigns, Facebook was something that the young people did, and they weren't, traditionally interested in politics, and certainly weren't the folks that came out and voted. But then as they became young professionals, and Facebook opened up from beyond a college campus tool for people to network. Even in 2010, when we were doing Perry's paperless strategy, it was, let's make sure we push something out on Facebook at least once a day. And it wasn't the kind of thing where we expected a lot of pull back into the campaign. Again, the voters we were targeting were older. They weren't on Facebook, and they wanted to receive communication from us in different ways. We opted for email, and it seemed to be the most effective. And then when Facebook started to allow pictures and graphics with your posts, and they started to allow hyperlinks with your posts, and then we started to dedicate resources on campaign staffs. Like, let's listen to what people are telling us, because people can message campaigns from Messenger. They can message from the comments. They can get back and forth with each other. We can glean some very interesting things from that. We can speak directly to people. So it has all of that one-to-one, one-to-many, many-to-many, and many-to-one. Covers all those bases of communication. Then Twitter does as well. Twitter was launched here in, I think it was 2008 or 2009 at South by Southwest, and it wasn't quite the political tool that it became in the 2016 to 2020 races.
Before we leave Facebook, so when did Facebook shift to it being kind of an old person's social media? Or is that an accurate description?
Yeah, no, certainly. Probably around 2015, 2016. I think there was just an exodus to other platforms that gave young folks, more engagement and more kind of attention, and frankly a little more anonymity from their parents or the community. Like between 2012 and 2016, it was just everybody was getting on Facebook, and it almost became the advertising almost became like demographic buys as opposed to targeted advertising buys. And then when Facebook started to do the targeted advertising, custom audiences, and partially with the 2012 presidential campaigns, and then more opened up in 2014 and a lot more opened up in 2016. We weren't trying to just push, the top 3 poll messages. We were trying to target messages to every conceivable constituency that would turn and support a candidate. Mm-hmm. So it became less about what are your 3 talking points, and it became more about looking at your polling matrix and what do the people in this demographic care about and want to hear, and then how do you put advertising dollars behind that. So even if there are 18 to 25-year-olds and they're the smallest demographic minority on Facebook, we're still leveraging the advertising program to get to them and get them to a persuadable, informed, and mobilized position of, okay, I'm going to vote for you as my candidate.
Has your opinion changed in terms of the paperless campaign? And I think there has certainly been some debate over this in the last 2 or 3 cycles. Mm-hmm. So Perry comes out, no campaign signs. Mm-hmm. And Abbott and Patrick followed, stopped spending money on statewide campaigns for signs. Then Beto comes in. He does a lot of signs against Cruz. Mm-hmm. And it was kind of something to rally around, the signs. And it seemed like that there was a mobilization around the fact people would talk about it of all ages. Well, in my neighborhood, we're about 2/3 Beto, 1/3 Abbott, or if there were Abbott signs, you could tell because there were other Republican signs.
Right.
So, what is the thinking about how you organize digitally, and the value that we're learning about in terms of seeing people just staring them in the eye, seeing them face to face. How do you weigh that out when you're deciding?
So we had a lot of back to Perry, we had a lot of conversations about yard signs. And I don't know if somebody said this or it was just my way of shortening the conversation, but the conclusion I drew that still holds today is yard signs don't get votes, they reflect votes. And when we build a digital strategy, it's a strategy to get votes. It's a strategy to pull people in through an interactive medium that you can't do on TV, on direct mail, certainly not with a yard sign. Even if you put a QR code on a yard sign, it's not interactive. It's not pushed directly to a person with a call to action and asking them to respond back to the candidate or back to the campaign. And that, to me, elevates digital over all of the messages. There are certainly cases for when you do a lot of TV because you just can't possibly reach all of the people and wait. And like I said earlier, the campaign that scales quickly and consistently will win. So TV will certainly do that. And you can put a telephone number and you can have a call to action in a script. I need your support, those kinds of things. But the interactive property of the internet so underlies and undergirds the strength of campaigns today that has to be the basis for which your strategy is built. How are we going to measure and make sure we're bringing back votes? So with Beto and his sense of distributing a lot of yard signs, there may have been that, a lot of supporters, maybe I need to look his way because my neighborhood's papered over with his yard signs. But it didn't have invitations to bringing people to a gathering or a meetup with him. It didn't have reasons for why he's better than Cruz. And I don't think Cruz leaned into yard signs in that campaign to counterbalance Beto. But the visuals were, wow, this guy's everywhere. I mean, granted, he came close, but he didn't win. And I wasn't on the Cruz campaign, and I don't know what their digital strategy was. But I bet they had a digital strategy where you're trying to measure how many people are we pulling in. And I bet if Beto had some things to do over with all of the money that they got, they probably would have started earlier with a digital strategy that would have gotten down to the grassroots level and leveraged those people who are asking for yard signs beyond the simple ask of put a yard sign out and maybe donate and buy a T-shirt.
Yeah. Well, it's part of why Texas, well, tell me where Texas fits in terms of the entire country in this kind of digital the digital communications world. I mean, we are, the center of conservative America. Mm-hmm. We're also a massive state. Yeah. You hear people in other states talking about walking the distance of the state and all that kind of thing. That just doesn't happen here. But where do we fit? Are we ahead? Are we behind? I'm assuming we're ahead. We're ahead in everything.
Mm-hmm. Well, we have a critical mass of conservatives, so that puts us ahead. Right. I mean, I wouldn't say it's a demographic issue where you just put out a conservative message and 6 out of 10 Texans are like right on. Uh-huh. But it's certainly easier to scale with digital using a conservative message to people you're introducing yourself to because there's more commonality with those values. So the number alone is large. In Texas, we have the largest number of Republican grassroots donors of any state in the state. That goes to our geography. Yeah, any state in the country. That goes to our geography simply. But we also, there are other states that try to be, more conservative or have more conservatives. I'm thinking of Florida for one that has a large population, but we generate more grassroots conservative donations to conservative causes and Republicans across the nation than any state. And that's somebody who gives $125 per year or less to one candidate or multiple candidates. And so then you think of the large mega donors that Texas has because of our great economy and our tradition of supporting conservative candidates. And we're certainly driving that engine across the country. And presidential candidates would do well to mine the data in Texas to try to get them, the foundation of the strong grassroots money that can come in $5 and $10 donations over and over to fuel their campaign, even though they're thinking about Iowa and they're thinking about South Carolina or they're thinking about New Hampshire. They should mine Texas because if they can run to the nomination, they can count on a lot of Texan support after the primaries are over.
Now, do we win, and we just always win, in Texas? And I always say when people ask me, we win because our ideas are better.
Mm-hmm.
We win because of the performance of the state, because people are flocking here, because our economy is good, because we stand by our values, we let business prosper, our courts are fair and balanced. What role does our digital strategy have to do with that? Because maybe not everyone knows that.
Mm-hmm.
And we are in this business because we don't have control of the mainstream media.
Mm-hmm.
Every article that you see online, because we no longer pick up newspapers, and the evening news, is what a terrible place this is.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can think of a couple examples and anecdotes that color that in a little bit. With the 2022 statewide campaigns, I worked on several campaigns that were targeting movers and first-time voters and people who had not registered to vote. And so with the candidate that was working, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, working statewide, we were targeting movers and we were targeting Hispanic Republicans with proven poll messages. We thought these folks would respond to the conservative message, but with the movers, we knew they had Republican vote history in other states, but how would they handle moving to Texas? Because, the majority of folks are moving to the metropolitan areas. And so if they're moving into Austin with a Republican vote history, are they adopting the blue ways, or are they going to continue to vote Republican? And some of that content was the most well-received content I've worked with in the last 10 years. About schools, about jobs, about securing our border. It was all very well received. And, it wasn't like we were preaching to the choir. It was very, let's hope this persuades, because that's what our poll tells us to do. Mm-hmm. I worked with another organization that was an industry organization, and we used some advanced tactics to find people who work in industrial areas and work there 5 days a week. And did they have a vote history? Did they have a vote history in their household? If they didn't have a vote history in their household, how could we persuade them with targeted advertising to go register? And then once they registered to vote in the general election, of course they have no primary history, but the industry has an interest in saying, voting is good for Texas jobs in our industry, and you have a chance on your ballot to vote for your industry. And of course, it was an industry group, so we can't say what candidates to vote for because that would be partisan. We were nonpartisan. And 42% of the people that registered for the first time turned out in 2022 and voted in the general election. And if they were voting their industry, they were probably voting for the conservative candidates that were protecting, or should I say, supporting the energy industry in Texas, and were saying things that were, we want to protect fossil fuel production. We want to protect the jobs. We don't want to do away with those things because that's countercultural to what Texas values are. And then that was just, what some folks in the other 49 states might be saying.
Well, in terms of looking at the conservative message, another advantage that we have is that we're positive.
Mm-hmm.
And I think our opponents are at a disadvantage, mm-hmm. because when they come out and say, like CNBC said this week, Texas is the worst place to live in the country.
Right.
I mean, it's not credible.
Right. It's not credible, and they're the only outlet that's saying that.
Right. Yeah. It's kind of hard to pull it together. But I'm interested, over this past 20 years, some of the things that we thought would happen with digital media has not happened. Young people still don't vote. That's still a good bet. When somebody comes up and says, we're going to get those young people out, and that's how I'm going to win, whether that's Beto or Vivek or whomever it is, I always think you don't have a strategy that's going to win, because they are. I think. What do you think? I think they've got too much competition. You can come in with the best piece of digital whatever to slide into their Twitter feed or get into their feed anywhere, and there's still going to be something that's competing that's probably more interesting.
Right, that's right. I think it's a mix of a couple things. One, they're not targeted nearly as heavily as older voters are. Relative, the 18 to 25 demographic. If you can get any of them at the last minute, you've done well.
Uh-huh.
The older voters 25 and older, even 35 and older, and then 45 and older, have life circumstances that make them think about voting. Back to my friend Dave Carney, he used to say, we don't know why people vote, but we do know which people vote. So it's not like we could go to an 18 to 25-year-old and watch this 3-minute video and this is why you should vote. But we do know the people who are predisposed and have the behavior to vote. And so we're going after them. Mm-hmm. And then we know segments within that. We know these people won't vote for us. We know these people will vote for us. These other people might vote for us. So we're gonna show them. We're going to show 2 out of 3 of those segments. And so it might be self-fulfilling in some ways that the 18, 25-year-olds don't vote, but the Democratic Party does an incredible job or does a very labor-intense job of registering them and then being disappointed on Election Day when most of them do not turn out to vote.
Yeah. What about, can you tell me stories where you feel like you went down a wrong track or something that turned out? I remember in 2016 when Ted Cruz started texting.
Mm-hmm.
And people were calling me. I wasn't working for Ted Cruz, but people were just calling me and saying, this is awful. They're texting me, how did he get my number?
Mm-hmm.
People are going to respond to this. This is going to be negative.
Mm-hmm.
This absolutely shouldn't happen. And now I get texts from Doug Borgum. I get texts from everybody.
Right.
It's just but are there things that you've tried that just didn't work and you go, no, we're not going to do that? Or are there things that just have to become kind of baked in?
Well, sure. The Perry home headquarters that worked for his reelection, for Perry's reelection as governor in Texas, did not work in Iowa. And it was a different culture. And I don't mean Southern versus Northern or Texas versus Iowa. The Iowa caucus was an in-person deal. They wanted to see you. They wanted to shake your hand. They wanted to talk to you. And you were going to have to earn that by in-person visits. So we had this model that worked in Texas that was, really buoyed by Rick Perry's large name ID numbers, and then translating that into Iowa and New Hampshire and South Carolina. And I think we even started doing it in Florida. Didn't work at all. Mm-hmm. Just folks weren't ready to. So that model works well for an incumbent with a high name ID, but didn't work well when we tried to replicate that mm-hmm. in the early presidential states.
Was there a shift to phones, from computer to phones? And, I remember several things. Mm-hmm. One is I remember every campaign I've ever worked on with you arguing that we should be spending more on digital than we were on direct mail. Mm-hmm. And I don't know when the change was made.
No. Well.
And then I want to ask about phones too. But
yeah, sure. So for the cost of a direct mail piece, we know we can touch people 5, 6, and 7 times. And for the cost of a direct mail piece with an auditing platform that we use working behind the scenes, we might serve 40 impressions, but we know 8 to 10 to 12 of them were actually consumed. And it's still the same as the cost of a direct mail piece. So that's where, I mean, like, we have this accountability. We have the ability to provide report almost in near real time about how this is working, and how the gravity of, we're able to put these impressions in front of people and measure that they're using them, and then once they've consumed it, let's move to the next message. And so we might be able to do that in the timeline of concept to mail drop on a direct mail piece. We might be able to show somebody 3 to 4 iterations of a video or a message sequence, going from, hi, I'm candidate, to, these things about me now, can I ask you for your vote? And I think that's just so much more dynamic. And then also it's like I mentioned earlier, we're pulling people into engagement with this media as well as pushing people to engagement. To your question about phones, you could always reach people with phones, but when the mobile phone became more ubiquitous, and you could do things and see things on a screen, that's when it really became like, okay, let's make sure we're covering all the bases there. And now, you can send a TV spot, 15 or 30 seconds, I would recommend 15, through a text message, and you can see the completion rate. And it's as high as what you would expect on TV, or even higher, because about 96% of text messages are consumed. And so with a video, you can see the consumption rate, and there's no change in the channel. If they don't want to watch it then, they can watch it later. It's not a TV commercial where they are distracted or looking for the remote and changing. I'm still a big believer in TV, and I think 2024 will be, media spots everywhere. There'll be TV and video everywhere, and that's
so how will that work as more and more people cut cords?
I know you wanted to keep this to 30 minutes, but let me try to answer that question. So the targeting on cord cutting has become a lot more sophisticated. I think there was this space and time where on campaigns that we worked on, we were buying data sets on people who were cutting cords, and we were watching the attrition on traditional cable increase as more people were cutting cords, and the platforms hadn't caught up to, yes, we know who those people are and we'll let you target them. And so all the platforms now, which is why I predict there'll just be so much more video in this federal election cycle, is all the platforms are just, come one, come all, come target. Now, with the exception of Google, that has a lot of privacy in places for small campaigns, but there are still ways to get on their network and deliver targeted videos. Yeah. And we won't even be concerned, I predict, as much of, did they watch it in their house? Did they watch it on their laptop? Did they watch it on their phone? Did they watch it on Facebook? Did they see it on, where did they see it? We won't be as concerned about that. We're just going to bundle all the consumption together and say, well, what's the average view per voter? And how many times did we show that in a 3-week period? And then how much cheaper was that than just a straight up TV buy? Because we measure the points on TV versus the number of impressions, or the quantity, the equivalent number of points that you might get going outside of traditional cable buys and going through cord cutter, OTT, or CTV type delivery.
I've got a couple more questions that I don't want to get off without asking you. What do you think the progressives are doing wrong? Not in terms of, we've agreed that they've got the wrong message, and there may be no way to overcome that. But we see in national politics that having the right message doesn't always lead to disaster. Yeah. Look at our current president. So I'm wondering if what do they have strategies that are consistently wrong? Do they misread Texas in ways? Are they looking at the data? Do they not know what we think?
Here's my take on them. I think the Democrats used to be really good at building coalitions, and they got away from that. And they started to do what they accused of us conservatives of, was the litmus test. If you believe these three things, we'll let you in. And we never did that, and they never did that. They just did good coalition building. And then I think at some point when they lost their grip on Texas, the best and brightest minds in the Democrats came into Austin, and they started to absorb the Austin culture, and they started to believe that if they export what happens in Austin to East Texas, to the Panhandle, to the West Texas, South Texas, they'll be heralded as the people who are pulling people off the shackles of this so-called, Texas conservative values that people are trapped by. Mm-hmm. And in my opinion, what people outside of Austin realize is those traditional Texas values bring economic opportunity. And if you start talking about, well, we need to have more regulation, well, we need to increase lawsuits, well, we need to start switching our fuel sources over, and we need to have an energy transition, and well, we need to be more this, that, or the other, it starts to be a litmus test, and it also starts to be things that aren't about jobs, that also aren't about economic opportunity for future generations.
Parental empowerment.
Right. And so then you become distracted by, the Democrats become distracted by what they think what they believe when they come together in a room in Austin they should export to the rest of Texas, and it just doesn't take. And so I think they have I think that's their Achilles heel, is they believe their own message without really believing what the numbers would tell them.
What do you think? I want to get your thinking as we close out on what you see in 2024. And we didn't talk about Twitter. Mm-hmm. And that Texan Elon Musk, who now owns Twitter, and what kind of changes you see there. But what do you see happening here? And the unique, we've got Trump with a huge digital machine here. And looking ahead, what are you thinking?
Well, 2024 is going to be, I think it's going to, as I said before, I think it's going to be a lot of video, which is going to lend itself to the candidate with the most money. Even though you can probably run a video budget to target a wide swath of Texas and have 50 or 60% of that off of broadcast or cable and still get the same kind of impressions or points or views by folks that aren't on traditional cable and broadcast, it's still a big, expensive state to run across. And so as far as the presidential primary goes, and as far as running for president goes, getting those votes out of Texas is going to be, an expensive part. I don't know if Texas is going to play in the primary of deciding who's going to be president. Trump is just so formidable. You think you see some challenging opportunities with Pence. You think you see some challenging opportunities with DeSantis. But, Trump just keeps staying at the forefront of the preferred candidate of Texas Republicans. And so if Texas is in play at that point, anybody that wants to try to pry it away from Trump is going to have to spend a lot of money here to get their message out. And they will have already run through, 6 or 8 states before then where they would have run and spent a lot of money. So it's going to be hard to beat Trump in Texas. But a digital play would be the way to do that if there was somebody who could challenge Trump with enough money and resources and could scale quickly.
Well, what about Twitter, though? What do you see as the future for Twitter with Elon and Threads and the kind of that quick hit?
Yeah,
the sort of quick
Threads
hit.
Threads is a good competitor to Twitter. It's curated. It's related to your Instagram account, and it might be more reflective of what your offline relationships are like. Twitter, it's so easy for people to follow each other before they really know what their tone in conversation is, that like the reaction, the overreaction to news or news of the day and the trending stuff makes it, a bit of a noisy medium for a political campaign to really get through to, the audience that matters. the voting audience is still pretty small in consideration to the rest of the American public. But with hashtags, with driving conversations, you can still do it. And it's definitely a base that you need to cover as a campaign. I just think that Threads is a place where people are going to look at, well, what do my friends think? And it's a little bit easier than it is like, well, let me look on Twitter and see what my friends think. I mean, you're just endlessly scrolling through things that aren't really from your curated network of friends and family. Threads is going to give that to you. Facebook gives that to you as well, but I think Threads is a little more distilled.
Well, it was Marshall McLuhan that said the medium is the message. There's a lot to say about this medium, and thank you, Ryan, for joining us today on 9th in Congress to set us up to date on digital communications in Texas. Thank you all for joining us. Look for the 9th in Congress podcast wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to receive the 9th in Congress newsletter, you can sign up at the TPPF website, www.texaspolicy.com.